just moments ago during this cabinet meeting. He was asked if Russia is still targeting the United States. The president said no. He was then asked another question related to this topic. Not exactly clear what that question is, but he used it as a chance to reiterate one of his talking points on Russia. He said, no president has been as tough as I have been on Russia. I think President Putin knows that better than anyone, better than the media. I can tell you, when I've spoken to Republicans, Chris, who are very disappointed in what they saw in Helsinki from this president, they go back to that point. They say, look at the policies. This president has been tough on Russia. He's enacted sanctions. He's expelled diplomats. And so that is part of the justification for not breaking with him completely after he appeared to side with Putin over his own intelligence community during that joint press conference. Now, again, all of this comes against the backdrop of the president yesterday trying to clarify and clean up his remarks amid really an avalanche of criticism from Democrats and Republicans and some of those within his own administration. The vice president, his secretary of state, urging him to come out and to make
and can we
comments.
just, Tina, you know, the point of that makeup, that clarification, was to say unequivocally that he believed U.S. intelligence. And at least for part one, he was trying to say he believed that Russia was responsible. He'd missed a not in there, or an apostrophe T, and the wasn't. But does he understand that if he says Russia is still targeting the U.S., no, he says in answer to that question, that that is not agreeing with the U.S. intelligence assessment?
It's a really important point. As you have stated, Chris, U.S. intelligence is that Russia continues to target the United States, that there needs to be a robust effort to make sure that this doesn't happen again in 2018, to make sure that the electoral process is protected from this type of activity. So that undoubtedly is going to be at the forefront here when we hear from Press Secretary Sarah Sanders a little bit later on today. But on that very point, Chris, you saw the president sort of give a caveat yesterday when he was supposed to be very clear, when he was supposed to come out and definitively say, yes, I not only believe in my intelligence community, I agree with their assessment that Russia is to blame. He added that caveat that he has done so many times in the past, which is to say there could also be someone else. That is going to be
I have to interrupt you because we're going to roll that tape, Kristen. It just came in.
I think so, Mike. I do think so. Thank you all very much. Appreciate it.
Press,
Thank you.
Way out. Is Russia still
Make
your way out? Is Russia still targeting the U.S., Mr. President?
Thank
Press,
you very
let's
much.
go. Make your way out. No, you don't believe that to be the case? Let's go. We're finished here.
Senator Schumer said you would walk back to Washington.
Press, let's go.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Make your way out. Can you just
We're doing very well. We are doing very well, and we're doing very well, probably as well as anybody has ever done with Russia. And there's been no president ever as tough as I have been on Russia. All you have to do is look at the numbers, look at what we've done, look at sanctions, look at ambassadors not there, look, unfortunately, at what happened in Syria recently. And I think President Putin knows that better than anybody, certainly a lot better than the media. He understands it, and he's not happy about it. And he shouldn't be happy about it, because there's never been a president as tough on Russia as I have been. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. So, Kristen Welker, just to reiterate the question, is Russia still targeting the U.S.? Something all of his intelligence agencies have answered in the affirmative, that the committees, the relevant committees, have answered in the affirmative, and he said no. And it strikes me, as I'm looking at that tape, I'm not sure you can see it from where you are, but you know what a cabinet meeting looks like, that the people in that room, as he was answering that question, are the very same people who you reported were the ones who got him to go back yesterday and make this statement clarifying that he supports the intelligence community. They had to sit around that table just minutes ago and listen to him essentially disavow a key finding of the intelligence community.
You're absolutely right. And I would expect that there are going to be meetings about how they will clarify those comments again when we hear from Sarah Sanders. But of course, we're going to hear from the president in the coming days. He says he's going to have a big event tomorrow, a workforce training event. So he'll get some more questions about all of this. But Chris, to your point, the bottom line, the president yet again appearing to break with the findings of his own intelligence community. Part of what some critics believe is going on is that the president wants to move on from this topic so significantly partly because he does feel as though it has cast a shadow over his electoral victory, even though the findings are also that it didn't have an impact necessarily on the election, but that for him this becomes very personal, and that's part of why you see him continually trying to turn the page and frankly sweep this under the rug.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.